Welcome to Kingdom Livin. I am the Reverend Brooke Ashley.
I'm Justin Stacy.
And I'm Justin Bowling.
Let us pray.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Okay, Brooke. So, what are we talking about tonight?
So, we're going to talk about All Saints Day, which is a church holiday that I did not know existed when I was a kid. Never heard of it before, but have grown to absolutely love it. It's one of my favorite Christian holidays. And really, it's in the Protestant church anyway. It's the time that we remember, especially those who have passed in the last calendar year, but also reflect on people who've been saints in our lives. So, like Sunday, we had an incredibly emotional service where it was a communion service too, which is just like uber beautiful. But we brought in the original altar table from the church that we're at now, that was in the chapel in the old sanctuary. And so we had 10 candles on it because we had 10 members pass away in the last year. And so there were 5 on each side of the elements. We bless the elements. We light the candles, saying each person's name and ring a bell for that person. And it was so emotional because our praise band sang the song Scars in Heaven before. And I don't know if you're familiar with that song, but don't listen to it unless you want to cry. I'm just telling you. And I was like an emotional mess. And I'm supposed to be like introducing this part of the service. So I'm standing there and Aaron's like giving me the side eye, like, come on, do what your thing. And like I'm wiping the tears away, like the snot out of my nose and stuff. And like everybody's looking. I'm like, and I finally just said, Am I supposed to be doing something? What am I supposed to be doing? And so then they tell me, and so I did that part and I paused and he was like, there's more. And I was like, what? I'm supposed to do what? And like I was just totally out of it. So I need to say this though, because I've gotten a couple phone calls from some people who were a little upset with him because I was crying and they felt like he needed to let me have my emotional moment. And said he kept calling me on the carpet to like, they felt like he could just like swoop in and take my part of the service. But I'll have to say he was actually doing a loving thing for me because he knew if I didn't get it together that I was going to be like just a jello heap on the floor crying. And so
you're
yeah,
saying this of your own free will. Aaron didn't like
I am.
make
He
you
didn't twist my arm
okay.
or anything. Totally free will. But you know, it was just in that moment was just really reflecting on all the people who had poured into my life and who weren't here anymore. And it just, you know, I think sometimes we forget that pastors get moved in worship services too. Like because we're usually up front and doing this stoic kind of, you know, when everybody else is like blubbering. And but I know I just totally lost it. But yeah, so it's a beautiful time. So after communion, there were altar tables set up in addition, and folks could light candles in honor and memory of those that have passed on. And it's just a beautiful reminder of the cloud of witnesses that we have surrounding us. So that's what it is in the Protestant church.
Yeah, that sounds pretty awesome. Like you, I had never heard of All Saints Day either, and it's interesting that we've heard of All Hallows Eve, but not All Hallows Day. You know,
Right?
We don't tie the two together, but yeah. So that was always the case. I know that this year at St. Thomas on the All Saints Day, they did do some kind of commemorative, you know, people who've died in the past year type thing, because we got an email before that Sunday asking if you had any loved one to die and you want them included in the service to let us know, that type of thing. Unfortunately, you know, I was still under the weather recovering, so I did not get to attend. So I really don't know what their service looked like, but I'm sure it was beautiful, as you said.
Well, ours is, we archive them, so you can always go back and look at them. But if people are curious to what a Protestant All Saints Day service would look like, but yeah, they're so impactful. I mean,
Mhm.
I've reflected on it. And then preview, I'm preaching Sunday, and so we're tying that into how are we being saints today?
Oh,
Like,
nice.
Ooh, I
how,
like it.
we reflected on the saints in our lives. How are we serving in the church, and how are we serving Christ to be saints for others? So preview.
Very good.
Yeah, and I would even say it's not too awfully different, unsurprisingly, in the Catholic Church. You think about like the Catholic calendar, there's a saint for every day. I mean, that's not exaggeration. There's literally some celebration on each day, a feast of so and so. But All Saints Day is a reminder that, even that doesn't cover, hardly any of it, because everybody's called to be a saint. Even the ones on the calendar, like we're talking about canonized saints. It's not just canonized saints we're talking about. It's on All Saints Day. It's everybody who's in heaven. And I read something today that kind of I thought was a good example of that and fit in well with this. Was that they were talking that Jesus spent 30 of his 33 years on earth kind of doing mundane day-to-day things. And that's not necessarily saying that, like none of that 30 years wasn't important. He obviously thought it was important to spend his 30 years doing those day-to-day activities. And so, like, even though we have these canonized saints who are like these all-star, celebrity witnesses of the faith, really the most important witnesses are your day-to-day people that you spend, your life growing around, the people that are witnesses to people in their everyday lives that you see at church every Sunday, that you see down the street, that make those impacts, those small impacts, but those many small impacts make a huge difference in somebody's life.
Yeah, I mean, I think I find it interesting. I mean, being a pastor, you sometimes, and some pastors tend to think that you have like these major impacts on people's lives, right? But when you really boil it down, the people who have the greatest impact, unless you're a terrible pastor, sometimes you can have a real negative impact. But the people who I mean, I think back, like I can't even name the pastors when I was younger. Like, I don't know their names, but I can tell you the names of my Sunday school teachers and my youth group leaders and my friends' parents who poured into me as a kid. That's impactful. Like, you don't have to be out here doing crazy huge things to be a saint. So Brennan Manning, who is one of my favorite all-time authors, talks about how we're all sinners and all saints, and how a lot of times we identify more with one than the other, and very rarely can we hold those in tension together. But that the more mature we become in Christ, the more we understand that they are constantly held in tension, and that we can be both at the same time. It's not an either or.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked pretty extensively on here about, I guess, the saints of my Christian life, both being my grandmothers and my great grandmother. Those I credit extensively for bringing me to faith. But a preacher that I don't know that I've gave credit where credit is due is the preacher of the Little Prayer Church of Christ back when I was just, I guess, searching for what Christianity is. His name was Mike Trent, and he would pay home visits to my grandma, and check on her, and he would actually. So my dad's garage business is actually on the same property as my grandparents' house. So anytime that he would come to visit my grandma, he would actually come to my dad's garage and he would talk to everyone. And it was interesting because he was always dressed up. He was always in like a suit, and he would be down in this dirty garage, and he would even offer to help. Just funny stuff. And he was such a very kind-hearted person that I think he had a big impact on me too. He showed me how friendly Christianity could be. And he was the one that was really harping for me to be baptized, even while I was not really attending church that much. He was still saying, here's the need why you should be baptized. And so I credit for him really putting in my mind that this is something that I need to do if I want to be a Christian, that I need to take that step and do that. And he was a really, really good person. So unfortunately he got sick and passed away probably 2007, 2008, somewhere in that time frame. But yeah, so I give him credit for sure as being a saint in my Christian journey.
Yeah, I think what made this service for me just really hit home is we're approaching the year anniversary of the death of probably one of my biggest mentors, and he died of COVID. And, my dad and I were talking about it last night after I was over there working on a project with him. And he just said, it's so hard for me to think that Wes is actually gone. And he was just this man with such a huge personality that it's like, how can that kind of energy just, I mean, how does he just die? Like, but even though we were of different denominations, he was always my biggest cheerleader, even when I was, doubting whether to go into the ministry or not, even though he didn't exactly subscribe to female pastors, and but still just my biggest cheerleader, and I was thinking about I'm like trying not to cry now, but I was thinking about that, when I was lighting those candles, that, oh my gosh, I've got to light a candle for Wes this year. And, I think we underestimate sometimes the long-term impact, just being an encourager in the faith, so Barnabas is one of my favorite, New Testament characters that never gets a lot of play, but man, when I think back on what I want people to say about me when I'm gone, I want them to say, man, she was a Barnabas, she poured into us. So
stick your neck out for somebody else like that.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
But yeah, I like the cheerleading on type thing. I feel like that's a big part of it. And when on All Saints Day, we always pray the Litany of the Saints during Mass. Then it's like a list of saints and pray for us, and ends with all holy men and women pray for us. And it's like that, like you mentioned in the Catholic tradition, we think of it like you mentioned as well, the great cloud of witnesses that they were cheering us on when they were here, and they're still cheering us on today. And the examples that come to my mind of people in my life are always people that are kind of older in life and have already kind of ran most of the race type thing. And there's a couple people specifically. One was when I was growing up, there was this older couple. They were probably in their 70s or 80s even then, when I was like 4 or 5. But the church I grew up in, they were there every week. They never really led any Sunday school, never led any services, but they were always participating. They'd be there all events they could, not like going out of the way to risk their health or something, but they were always present, always, a smiling face, and everybody knew them. And I still remember, Claude and Mary until this day, that they were there. They were always kind of giving that loving Christian example of how to just interact with people on a daily basis. And it's crazy that I still remember that, even though they weren't very close to me. I just remember their presence being there every week. And another one that comes to mind is my granddad. Anytime you go to anywhere in Wise County and you mention that you're, Ernie Culbertson's son, they're like, oh, well, yeah, he taught, woodworking for years. He's the sweetest type thing. And it's just crazy how much of an impact just, being there can have on that many people's lives. And it's not even like a big county. Wise County is not like some kind of metropolitan area, but there's so many people that have told me oh yeah, I know your granddad. And it's just a crazy example that you can have that kind of impact on that many people's lives.
So it reminds me of, the idea of the ministry of presence, right? Of being present. And that is such a huge component of the theology of Christian hospitality, right? Is being physically present and checked in. And I think about the folks like you're talking about, they're just kind of always there, right? And big occasions, little occasions, they just were always there. The ministry of presence. And I think that's something that as we've become this plugged in culture, we've lost a little bit of the ministry of presence because we're so busy that we don't have space in our lives to be present for people. And I wonder how that's going to affect when we look back, you know, as we start looking back, as the generations below us start looking back, are they going to have some of those same memories of the people who were just kind of there, you know?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that connection, but I really like that. And it makes a lot of sense. When you think about like a lot of the source of Christian hope, it's that, you know, that Christ is always there with us at that
Mhm.
point. And if we're supposed to be images of Christ in the world, you know, we have to have that same type of impact in people's lives, whether it's just being there for people. And yeah, that disconnect that we get from the digital age and the running everywhere, it doesn't have the same feel that it seems like it used to. But that's a good question. I wonder how that will play out in the future.
Yeah. And I mean, you brought it up now, but I was thinking about this earlier today because we started working on crafts for our Christmas tree that's going to be in downtown Johnson City at Founders Park. So y'all need to put that on your calendar. Like bowling, your kids will love it. Like there's like 100 live Christmas trees that are all decorated and lit up, and it's going to be like this huge
My
Candyland
kids, my
theme.
wife sounds like that's right up her
Yeah,
alley.
she would, and it's free. But anyway, you know, and we were just all sitting around doing what I would call mindless tasks. Like today we were just painting squares and circles a base color, you know, and I look up and it's like 2:30 and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I had a million things I had to do today and now nobody will leave and I got stuff to do, you know, and it's my job. And I was reminded that ministry is not about what you do, but it's who you are and where you're at. Like just being there. Like it's so important. Um, so it's just, you know, I also think that ministry happens in interruptions. Like our the biggest impact we have on people's lives is when their life interrupts ours and how we respond to that. And I think about the people who always seem to have time for me, you know, no matter what happens. Um, and so yeah, so those are some saints.
So, touching on Christian hospitality, you know, in the last podcast, we were talking about politics, and I was kind of talking about my journey away from considering myself evangelical, and then my journey to the Episcopal Church. You know, I may have been a little harsh on like all the churches that I've attended. I don't have any ill feelings for. So I feel like I watched it back multiple times, and I was like, you know what, I may have been a little harsh here, because it was my need to find something more accepting, and not that there was anything wrong with the church community, because I always felt welcome at these churches. It's just that it's the after outside of church on social media, those type of interactions, that's where I wasn't feeling welcome, right? So I guess I wanted to put that out there. But in terms of Christian hospitality, the church that my wife and I was married into, and we were members, you know, I'm sure we are still technically members. I don't think you ever just get disregarded as not a member anymore.
Oh yeah, you do.
I don't. I mean, I don't know that. That's
I don't know about that church, but there
right.
are
Exactly.
churches.
Yeah, I'm probably a member of multiple churches at this point, but they were the most hospitable community you can have. I mean, the women of the church for sure. Like they were always doing these events. For our wedding, we threw it together in a month. You know, we up and decided after I got a job that basically the next month we were going to get married. So we had 1 month to plan, and we didn't know what we were going to do for catering or anything like that. And then the women of the church was like, don't do a thing. We will provide all the food. And and they did. So they provided the church, they provided the food. Like they did so much for us that they're a huge blessing. Like they are saints. They absolutely are saints.
Mhm.
Love them to death. Another saint that I can think of I guess in terms of the hospitality is his name was Wayne Young, and unfortunately he just passed away like 2 weeks ago. He was in Lebanon, and I actually met him at the where we would take off garbage in town. He worked there as like a security guard. He was an older like man, and we met him, and he befriended me and Renee. We would take off trash. We would talk each other. We mostly talk politics, because we were of the same persuasion in politics, so we would talk about that. And come to find out, he actually attended Lebanon Presbyterian Church, and we were both from Presbyterian Church, so that was one of the churches that we actually tried, and all of the people there are wonderful people. It was one of those things where I never could get my wife to really buy into going to another church. She didn't have that desire, so forcing her to do it just wasn't happening. So
Sure.
we went multiple times. They actually had a her name was Mary. I forget her last name. So she was, a lady preacher, and Renee loved her.
They're
And-
trouble,
That's what I've heard. But Renee loved her, and so we were going to commit to going to Lebanon Presbyterian regularly, and then she retires almost immediately, and so then they go through the pastor searching phase, which takes a long time, and we were going. There were so many cringe-worthy pastors that when we would go, and Renee's like, ugh, like things that would be said, that it demotivated us to continue going. And so then we were back to square one. And so, but the church community there, I guess the point I'm trying to make, the church community and the hospitality that they present, and maybe it's a Presbyterian thing too, it's wonderful. Like these are saints, and I love those people to death too. So yeah, I guess I just felt the need to say that I love all the churches that we came from in the church communities. My journey was more, maybe even self-serving, if you want to be honest, to where I felt more in tune with the theology, if you will, more in tune with this form of Christianity accepting me and my beliefs versus, because you can be hospitable and disagree. I think we've talked about that and the need to do it. You should do that. But I just felt the need that I needed to find a church. Now, I will say this. And apparently, I'm just going to talk all night about this stuff.
Just say this.
Yeah, well, I'll say this. I have, even though I love St. Thomas, and I'm going to be confirmed at the end of the month. Bishop is coming to for confirmations,
Nice.
and me and Dustin and Keith both are being confirmed. So that's a next big step. But I will say that I felt it's been difficult, especially with COVID, to feel in community, if that makes sense. Because
That makes sense, yeah.
I can go to services when able. I can watch it. They live stream every one of them, but the community part, and I do wonder too, because it's in a different town, because it's in Abingdon, it's a longer drive for me. If it's always going to be a struggle, because I
would say,
can't.
yeah. I mean,
Right.
I don't mean to be negative, Nancy, but you're gonna have to work harder
Yeah.
at developing that community, because it's not going to come natural because it's such a distance for you.
Yep. Yeah, and that's my fear.
Mhm.
But I will say that this I definitely want this to work. I want this to be where I land and where I am for the foreseeable future, just because I love the church. I love the Eucharist, communion. I love just everything about it. I just wish that the community part felt more natural and felt like it was going to be easier to be in community. But I think it's because it's in a different town that even in best of times, it's going to be a struggle for me to be in community. So there's my soapbox. I'll turn it back over to you all.
I mean, I feel like I need some kind of confession or disclaimer too. I mean, Brooks had one about the crying in church, and now you had your. I need something to. One thing I did want to add on too is, like, I feel like one of the things that you really like with the saints is they can give you an example that you can relate to, and so like you talk about like all the canonized ones, like St. Augustine and all these, like there's a reason why they became so popular, is they connected with so many people. But when you talk about your day-to-day saints too, there's a lot of things you can find in common with somebody who lives in the same area, in the same century, in the same, kind of set of cultural norms that you live in as well, that might be a little bit easier to relate to than somebody from, 12th century France doesn't speak the language. So I think that's something on All Saints Day we can reflect on as well, is like you can really find those people in your local community, or somebody who who struggled with something that you've been struggling with, or going through some of the same things that you've been going with. No matter how small the issue or how big the issue, seeing somebody in your church community that can relate to you and be like, hey, yeah, I know what you're going through. I've been there. Let me kind of tell you about that. That means a whole lot to people that are going through something.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of intergenerational ministry, multiple generational ministry. I mean, there is a place and a time for children's ministry and teen ministry and all that kind of stuff. But there is something about being in relationship with people of different ages that help remind you, you're not alone. You are going to survive. I mean, I when I was a young mom with my 2 kids, Aaron and I needed other parents telling us, you're going to survive this. Like, you're going to survive this. But just, I teach the oldest Sunday school class. We're talking about this today too. They were all like, we're the oldest Sunday school class, and I mean, they're older by me than decades, and, it's so interesting to me to hear how faith has shaped their lives, where they've made mistakes, where they've maybe fallen away from faith during hard times. It's so important that we share those stories, and be in relationship. So I can see that. I mean, like, I love learning about the saints. I mean,
oh yeah,
Mother Teresa is like on a pedestal for me. Like, oh my gosh. But when I think about the saints in my life, I don't think about those famous kind of people. I think about the people who have picked me up and dusted me off.
And I feel like people like that can help you realize some of the timelessness of the problems too, because we always think about like, oh, this age is completely different than anything that's came before us. But you talk to somebody who's 70 or 80, they're like, yeah, I was dealing with a lot of the same type of things and the same type of situations that you're in as well. It's not, you're not completely unique. So you do have people you can lean on. You're not having to go through this walk alone. There are people, there is, the church whole that can pray with you and pray for you.
So, we're big UT fans, and that's no secret.
I'm sorry.
But, I know, right? But Aaron said something Sunday morning, and he said, he says, I imagine this. He says, I imagine that we're in Neyland Stadium, and the stadium, it's packed, right? And my cloud of witnesses are there, and I run out to the 50-yard line, and everybody's on their feet cheering for me. He says, that's your cloud of witnesses. They want you to be successful. They want you to love others for Christ. They want you to win the race, and so they're doing all that they can to cheer you on. And I think we just feel isolated sometimes. I mean, you're talking about it, Stacy, how you feel isolated. And I just, the communion liturgy that we use for All Saints Day, it starts out the God of Adam, and the God of this and the God of that, and it goes through, and you're sitting there thinking, whoa, the generations of where God has been faithful.
That's what I love about like the Litany of the Saints too. It kind of starts off with those first ones that like Paul and Peter, and then it goes through like the church age for the next couple of hundred years when they're being oppressed, and there's like a list of 20 saints. But if you're kind of following along, you see how this is going through the ages, and God has been faithful he's left us a communion of people to be with in every age. He's not left us since then, and he's not going to leave us. He's always going to be there. It's really a constant reminder that you have all these people that are there for you.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I mean, it's emotional, and a couple people have said, next year I'm not coming on All Saints Day because I lost it. And I was like, dude, I mean, I lost it up in front of everybody. Like, I mean, like, I'm snotting myself, like, but I don't know. It's a beautiful representation of what it means to be part of the family of God, you know.
Yeah, and it's an often forgotten one, like Justin mentioned. We always, like you said, we always hear Halloween, but we don't make the connection that means the day before All Saints. It's literally what it means. It's something we can all find something in and reflect upon. And even if it's just as simple as, like you said, thinking about the past year and people that have been important to you that you've lost, that's there's no better time to do it than All Saints Day.
Yeah.
That is true. I was thinking of a saint who I have said should be canonized as a saint in
I already
some
know who
church.
you're talking about.
Oh,
You already
no,
know because I've already
I'm very
I've said
nervous.
this, but that's Mr. Rogers, and I think he should be canonized in every church as a saint. But at least the Presbyterian Church, since that was he was a pastor of and that's the member of. But I feel like, think of the impact he's had on how many kids. And I don't want to talk too much about him because, spoilers, we are going to do a podcast on Mr. Rogers. So we're going to talk about all this. But I think that he is definitely a saint for all of us. If you grew up with him, if you watched him, he's a
it's
saint
just
for
not
all of us.
men.
Yeah, his legacy continues.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, he's still popular today. And trust me, I think I can sing every word to every Daniel the Tiger episode right now. And, it's continuing. Do your best.
Yeah.
And you're feeling sad.
I do wonder, because you actually see a lot of merchandise now of Mr. Rogers. And I do wonder how he would take to that, because when he was alive, he would not allow it. Because he did not like the consumeristic stuff. And so he would not allow merchandise to be sold for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So now that it is, I wonder if his, what he would think about that. But that's
I
another
feel like
topic.
it would probably at least feel less promoting his show. So it's at least a little bit different.
Right. Maybe so.
Yeah.
Maybe so.
Yeah, I don't know that it's promoting the show as it is much the promoting just what he stood for.
The legacy and what he stood for.
Taught all
Yeah.
of us, So
yeah, that's going to be another podcast. Maybe that could be our next podcast.
Spoiler.
Spoiler alert.
Right.
Mr. Rogers in our cloud of witnesses.
That's right. Oh, good stuff. Can't get much better than talking about the Saints. But I guess we can conclude with that. So peace be to you. Have a good night.
Thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you got some enjoyment out of the podcast this week. Remember to check out our website, www.appalachianliturgy.com, and follow us on all of our social medias. If you want an easy way to support us, though, make sure to subscribe to our channels and like our videos on YouTube. Also, join our email list for updates and let us know how we're doing. See you next week, everyone. Appalachian Liturgy Podcast is a JRS Studios production.